Hello everyone, welcome to Calvin's Lab. So this video is going to be an introduction to laboratory safety. So some caveats before we get started. This is not meant to be all-inclusive. There may be specific protocols in place for your lab depending on what kind of work you do. So make sure you consult your lab's standard operating procedure, or SOP, for specific lab requirements. Also, these are general guidelines that most labs follow, including teaching labs such as an undergraduate chemistry course, but they're also in place in many research labs as well. And this presentation will focus specifically on proper lab attire, and we'll get into some of the ideas of good, safe lab behavior, but we aren't going to cover all of the safety features for your specific lab, or all the common safety features, safety equipment in the lab. So we may do a video on that in the future, but you should also consult your lab's standard operating procedure for information on all of the safety equipment that's in your lab and where it's located and how to use it. Right now, am I ready to be in a lab? I don't think so. Yeah, so shoes. Some sort of shoes with a fairly stiff sole are required in a laboratory because you never know what's going to be on the floor. Broken glass, pins, razor blades. You never know what's going to be on the lab floor, and you also never know what kind of germs are going to be on those things. So you always need some sort of footwear that has a fairly tough sole. That way, if you step on something, you aren't going to hurt your foot. These sandals, they've got a fairly strong sole. I'm not going to hurt my foot if I step on anything. However, the top of my feet are still exposed. And so if I drop a beaker on them, or spill some boiling water or a solution of hydrochloric acid, that's not going to be a good time. Even something as simple as dropping my phone on my foot with these sandals on is probably going to hurt. Ouch. Yep, it hurt. Sandals, not good. You typically need closed-toed shoes, which means that the shoe completely covers your foot. So, here we have closed-toed shoes, and they are actually steel-toe sneakers. So, I can take this water bottle here, which is a metal water bottle full of water, and I can drop it on my foot, and it's not going to hurt. So, depending on your specific lab's rule, I'm sure there's a lab out there somewhere where you have to wear steel toes, but for most labs, regular sneakers will be fine. So anyway, these are closed-toed shoes. Of course, they should be tied. There's that. But you'll notice I'm still wearing shorts, and most labs require that you wear pants. Now, you may be thinking, do pants really prevent a lot of injuries that could happen? I mean, if you think about it, so you may be wondering if pants actually are going to help prevent injuries, because if you're working with a solution and you spill some, yeah, you might get some on your foot, but the chance that you'll get some on this part of your leg that's exposed is pretty slim. However, if you spill some and the solution bounces, it can still get there. And you might think, yeah, pants, they're not really they won't really protect you much, but I have seen several injuries avoided by wearing pants instead of shorts. Another thing to consider when going into the lab is you don't want stuff to be loose or dangling. So if you have jewelry like necklaces, consider tucking them underneath your shirt, especially if you're going to be bending over looking at something. You don't want to have that get caught up in something or have it dip into a solution of hydrochloric acid or something like that. Also, if you have any bracelets that are loose and dangling, this is the closest thing I could find to a loose dangling bracelet. But I think this would be pretty alright. It's not going to get caught up in a bunch of things, but if it was really loose and dangling, then you might consider just taking it off while you're in the lab. Let's see, so necklaces should probably, especially if they're really loose, should consider tucking them underneath your shirt. Speaking of shirts, I didn't do a separate skit on it, but you should wear a shirt in the lab. That's generally, shirts are generally required. Also, if you have long hair, you should tie it back. A ponytail works for most situations. However, you need to think about what's going to be behind you. If you're in a very tight lab and with like benches laid out in rows like a teaching lab, and so there's going to be someone sitting behind you and that person is going to have a Bunsen burner lit, then you might want to consider putting your hair in a bun instead of a ponytail, because I have seen a ponytail accidentally get caught in the flame of a Bunsen burner, and it's not fun. So if you're wearing a long sleeve shirt or a sweatshirt or a jacket other than your lab coat, you need to be careful about where your sleeves are, because you don't want to spill anything on your sleeves. So you just need to be aware of that. Also, typically, I never wear a tie in the lab. If I need to work in the lab and then I have a meeting afterwards, I will typically take off the tie. I will typically take off the tie, work in the lab, and then slip it back on afterwards. However, occasionally I might have to, if I'm doing something quickly, I might not have time to take off the tie. So, if you are wearing a tie in the lab, I highly recommend you get a tie bar of some type. So, a tie bar clips onto your shirt, and it clips the tie, and it makes it so that if you bend over, the tie doesn't come out. So this is with the tie bar, and then this is without. So you can imagine if you're leaning over a countertop trying to reach something, the tie could dip into a solution of hydrochloric acid or bacterial cell culture or something, and then you've now contaminated your tie. So with the tie bar, it helps prevent that. Also, wearing a lab coat helps prevent that. So even if lab coats aren't required for the particular thing you're doing, if you're wearing a tie, you might want to throw on a lab coat so that you don't have to worry about contaminating your tie. So I already kind of got into the discussion, got into talking about lab coats. Lab coats are a type of personal protective equipment. Basically, a lab coat is used to prevent any contamination of your clothing. Let's say you're working with a strain of bacteria. If you spill some on the lab coat, it's alright because the lab coat typically stays in the lab until it's washed or sanitized. And so that contamination never leaves the lab. But if you spill it on your regular clothes and then you go to eat and you brush up against someone, that contamination, that bacteria can transfer, and that's not a good thing. That's probably an understatement. But anyway, so lab coats are a type of personal protective equipment. They're special equipment that you use when you're in the lab to mitigate certain risks associated with working in that particular lab. Depending on the lab you're in, what you're doing, you might need to wear a lab coat all the time. You might need to wear a lab coat when doing certain experiments, or a lab coat might be optional. So, let's now transition into talking about other forms of personal protective equipment.
So, personal protective equipment is just a general term for any equipment designed to protect the wearer from harm in a certain situation. And what equipment is required really depends on the situation, and there's different levels of the same equipment, again, for different situations. So, we're going to start off with something easy to visualize, and this pun is definitely intended. We'll start with eye protection. So the goal of eye protection is to prevent substances from entering the eye. And of course there's different types for different applications. Starting off with regular eyeglasses, for certain situations, for certain OSHA specifications, eyeglasses do count as eye protection, again in certain situations, but really they're not the best. What you really need are proper safety glasses. So instead of having the same material as eyeglasses, they are made of plastic, and so they are a lot stronger, and they're also shatter resistant. If they break, there won't be shards that break off that could go into your eye. So these safety glasses are good at protecting your eyes from a wide range of objects, whether it's liquids, whether it's dust, or whether it's larger particles such as sawdust. However, there's still room for stuff to get past the glasses, especially with smaller objects. So these glasses, they provide a lot more protection, and they also have that wraparound protection, and they are much better at preventing splashes of liquid from entering the eye. This protects against bigger shards such as wood chips. This particular helmet, this particular visor protects the face when you're using a chainsaw. So this face visor, again, protects more of the face than just the eyes, and it provides more protection against splashes. And then anyone who's been in an organic chemistry lab is familiar with these monogoggles. And the idea with these is that no matter where the substance, no matter which direction the splashes come from, they won't enter the goggles. So they provide the best protection when you're working with something that could seriously damage your eyesight, or if you're doing something that has the potential for a large amount of splashing. These particular goggles are also great for dust protection if you're doing anything that might have the potential to kick up dust. Hearing protection, you have earplugs and you have the around ear headphones. In a lab, if you're using a sonicator, which is a device that breaks cells apart using sound, then you might need hearing protection, and you should consult your lab's standard operating procedure or wherever you get information about the instruments in order to determine which instruments, if any, require hearing protection. And of course there's gloves. You have the regular exam gloves. They come in 3 varieties: latex, nitrile, and vinyl. And then you have gloves for other purposes, such as handling extremely hot or extremely cold substances. Typically you use those gloves when handling hot plates, when handling beakers with hot solution, or when looking for samples in the -80 degree freezer. The lesson here is to always wear the appropriate protective equipment. If you're doing anything that might damage your hearing, wear ear protection. Wear proper eye protection for the task. If you're using something that has the potential for a lot of splashing and it's really dangerous for your eye, you might want to wear the mono goggles. If you're doing something that has the potential for large chunks of stuff to be flying, you might want to wear thick visor. And then, you wear the appropriate personal protective equipment for the job you're doing. Lab coats are personal protective equipment, like I said before, so you need to make sure you're wearing a lab coat when the job requires it.